Lay down. Stay. All right, everybody. I'm just recording my backup here, but this week we're going to talk about what happens to a person's memory when something goes wrong. Let me quickly type this in here. Let's call it memory part 2. Now we're recording on both sites. I want to talk a little bit about what happens when you've encoded a memory, but you can't remember it, or when something goes wrong in the encoding process itself, so then the memory never quite gets captured correctly. So let's talk about the first stage of memory. So remember last week we talked about the three stages of memory, right? First is encoding, right? And so in the first stage, an encoding stage, what you do is you're taking in the information, and somewhere in your brain is storing it in the short-term memory, right? So the next stage, in the storage stage, you have short-term memory, long-term memory, and then in the last stage, there's the recalling of the information, retrieval, right? So in this stage, in the encoding stage, there are things that can happen that that prevent you from actually even making it to the storage part of things, right? One of those things is anxiety. So a lot of people that I've come in contact with that have high anxiety, they talk about the thoughts that race through their head all the time, and they're thinking about, if like you're in a conversation with me, for instance, right? And I have anxiety, what's going to be going through my head is, I'm going to be thinking about what you're thinking, right? I'm going to be trying to figure out what I should say next. I'm going to be thinking about how attractive or how famous the person is. I'm going to be thinking about pretty much everything but what's actually going on in the interaction, right? And because of that, that means I'm going to forget your name. I'm going to forget where you're from. I'm going to forget all these things because I'm nervous, right? So think about a time when you were nervous, where you met like a famous person, or you met somebody who you were really attracted to, and then everything in your mind is blank, right? Because then you're like, oh my God, what if this person likes me or doesn't like me? What if they don't like me? What does that say about me? Oh my God, what does the person just say, right? And then you forget their name, or you forget the, like what they just said, and then you have to, make some sort of socially acceptable statement to get them to repeat it. You know what I mean? So if you're anxious in an interaction, that's going to cause problems with actually the encoding of the memory, with the memory even making it through all the filters in your mind into something you can remember. There are clinical terms for this. Social anxiety disorder is one of them, or social phobia. That's another one. And that means that the situation that I just described happens all the time. And really that's what chronic means. Really the person is in persistent fear of ridicule by others. Right? So it's happening all the time. That's what chronic means. And then the persistent fear is just going on and on and on. And so that even when they're outside of the actual interaction later on, there's the person still thinking about what actually happened during the situation. So you'll get people who freeze up. Some will have panic attacks. Some have even described like blacking out or fainting. And that's because they get so anxious that the body just kind of freezes and shuts down. And what it does is it decreases attention and increases interference. So interference is one of those things that, whenever you have a lot of interference, you're not going to have a very fully functional memory of whatever the event is. So one thing for your notes this week that you want to make sure that you write down is, one problem with encoding is anxiety because of this reason, right? Here are some examples of anxiety disorders, and this is what it does, right? Increases attention and increases interference. Another problem with encoding is also related to attention is just, you not paying attention and being distracted by something else while you're trying to encode a memory. So ADHD is something that almost everybody has heard of these days. It's the attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. And there are many sources that say it's diagnosed far too frequently now, which is, the evidence is proving that it's probably true. The research says that, and even if it's not been diagnosed and overly prescribed medications and that sort of thing, ADHD is a real condition, and there's some of you out there that might have it now. I know there are some students at APS Online who have it, and I have a nephew that has it, right? So I kind of know quite a bit about it from his experiences. And basically what it is that it's just an inconsistent ability with short-term memory when compared to people who don't have ADHD. So some things they can remember, some things they can't. And the reason why, how it's described to me by my nephew, is that there's just noise in his head all the time. And he describes it almost as like a sensory overload kind of experience. So for him, in order to focus on something, it takes a lot of effort and concentration for him to focus on something. A lot more effort and concentration than it takes me to focus on something. And so, when he's on his medication and when he, is doing positive self-talk and really focused on something, then he does really well, just like any other kid would. But when his medication wears off, or he doesn't take it, or he forgets about it sometimes, or something like that, or if he is distracted by other kinds of information that are coming in, then he can't really focus as well as other people. So ADHD, people with ADHD definitely have problems encoding things, which is why traditionally they don't do as well in school as other students, because they're just really easily distracted. But those of you out there that think you can multitask, and see in quotes in there, multitasking in quotes, technology, interruptions really does affect your attention and affect your encoding of memories. So if you are studying, for instance, and you're getting messages on your phone, and you're watching TV, and your brother or sister's playing music in the other room, and there's lots of noise around you, you are not going to understand the material as well as somebody who, is perfectly concentrated and focused in a room free of distractions. Now, those of us who attempt to multitask, do a number of things at once, usually what ends up happening is that nothing is done to the best of your ability. Everything is kind of done, kind of in a middle range. But multitasking, it really takes away from your attention, and it hugely increases interference. Right? This idea of interference is the main problem with encoding. Right? We saw it here in both the anxiety and also with multitasking and ADHD. Right? It ruins attention, it increases interference. So let's talk about storage, right? So once you've made the memory, then you have to transfer it from your short-term memory to the long-term memory, right? You have to store it so that you can, get it out again later on. And so one major problem with storage is stress. Stress comes in a number of forms, so it's not always a horrible event like the flooding, right? Which would be very stressful for people who were affected by losing their house or having to relocate, or having their house ruined, maybe. Those are major stressors, right? But also there's like everyday things that just build up over time, right? Maybe you're getting a lot of pressure to get really good grades, but you feel like you also have a job and you also have responsibilities to watch your nephews or to watch your siblings, right? And so then what happens is like all these pressures build up on you, and you don't learn very well, you don't focus very well, you don't um, get a lot of sleep. All these things sort of combine together to hurt your storage ability. So let's talk about stress specifically, right? In stressor timing, in this section, this first little bullet point, what that means is that when the stress happens, that can interrupt the encoding or the storage depending on what stage you're in with the memory. So if you've just inputted the memory, right, you've just seen, I don't know, what's a good memory to see? You just saw a really good movie, right? And if there's something that interrupts the, oh man, I just saw this really great movie, and storing it in your long-term memory, there's going to be problems with ever retrieving it, right? So say you're watching a movie, you think it's really great, and then on the way home from the movie, you get in a car accident, right? Because there's something that happened immediately following the movie, right? You're not going to remember the movie fondly. You're not going to remember whole parts of it, maybe, because you had this major traumatic event that happened, right after you watch the movie. So the timing of the stress is important because it can interrupt either encoding or the storage part because it increases interference. See a theme yet? And then there's, of course, the duration, right? If the stress lasts a long time, then you're in trouble. The general pattern of stress is, you start off non-stress, right? And then you have an event that causes you stress, and it just goes up and up and up, and then you deal with it, and it releases the stress, right? It releases the stress. And then you can deal with another stressful episode, right? And it's kind of this, kind of a peak valley kind of effect. If you have constant stress, or if you're experiencing an extreme threat, what happens is that your stress level rises and rises and rises, and then hits this state, right, where you should be able to deal with it, right? But it just stays there, right? And more stresses keep adding on, and more things just keep happening, right? So it never goes down again. And your body doesn't handle that very well. One of the things that it does is prioritizes information, and so your storage ability is really messed up. So it can cause permanent storage deficits. Like you can have a hard time remembering anything that's going on in school if you have chronic, constant stress. So there are students out there that aren't sleeping in their home tonight. Right? There are students out there that don't have enough to eat. There are students out there that their parents are fighting, and it's really causing them to be upset. There are students out there that have kids of their own, right? There are students out there that have seen traumatic episodes in their lives, and they're still dealing with them, right? If somebody is going through a bunch of those, or even one that's really traumatic for them right now, that can cause permanent deficits with storage and encoding. Because you just don't have any attention for schoolwork. You don't have any attention for learning something new because you're dealing with this horrible event in your life, right? So the duration is important and the timing is important, right? When it happens and how long the stress lasts. And then there's intensity, right? Everybody experiences stress every day. For most people, it's in a low level of intensity, right? You have a quiz coming up, right? And you're kind of nervous about it, but so to alleviate the stress, you're going to study a little bit, right? That's a low level intensity stress. Mm-hmm. Last night, your home was destroyed by a tornado. That is a intense kind of stress, right? Because you experienced the trauma, right? So extreme threats like a trauma or a natural disaster or something like that, it can lead to this, really intense spike of stress. And because it was so extreme, it may stay in that same plateau state that we were talking about before with the stressor duration. If it lasts for a long time, because you keep having nightmares about it, because your family is still affected by it, because you have no place to sleep now because your home was destroyed. So now you guys are in a hotel or something like that, and it sucks being in a hotel because there's, 6 of you in a one-room, hotel room. You know what I mean? So extreme things that last for a long time are really, really bad for you. It's bad for your health. It's bad for your memory. It's bad for every aspect of your life. It's why, people under chronic stress like that need to reach out for help. And the last stage of memory is retrieval. So once you've had the memory and formed the memory, then you've stored the memory, then you have to get it out every once in a while so that you can remember it. So there's two competing theories with retrieval, right? The first one is memory decay, which basically says that the further in time you get from the memory, the more it fades away. Now you may have experienced this because there might have been a memory of, usually it happens when, in your age, you're 17, 18, usually this happens when you are younger, so that, you've had the memory for 10 years or so. And I don't know if you can think of a memory that this has happened to you, but there have been times when I have had a memory that I thought was accurate, but then it turned out later on that it wasn't accurate. And what's happened is that the details have faded away, and I've substituted my own kind of story in with the details to make it true for everybody. So the further in time you get away from an actual memory, the more the details fade away. The second thing the second competing theory, is that memories get interfered with. So that you have one memory, but then you make a new memory. And the new memory kind of pushes the old memory out of the way, right? And this memory is more interesting or newer, so you keep remembering that one, right? And then this one just kind of, eventually gets, forgotten about, and it fades away. So, what we're going to talk a little bit about in the webinar this week is, are eyewitness accounts reliable? If you know this stuff, and should they be weighed differently in court? We're going to talk about that during our webinar this week. So, if you're watching this, or if you're watching the webinar as a recording, I want you to think about that and what you would say. Are eyewitness reports reliable or not? The other thing I wanted to mention before we go is that there are diseases, aside from just trauma in your life, there are diseases that affect your memory. One of them is called dementia. The definition of dementia is that it's a loss of cognitive functioning of thoughts, right? Cognitions mean thoughts, of cognitive functioning over a long period of time in what used to be a previously unaffected person. So this happens usually because of aging. Occasionally you can get dementia because of head trauma if you hit your head in certain ways. Or because of certain diseases like Parkinson's or Huntington's disease. As a side effect, they can cause dementia, or as a secondary symptom, they can cause dementia. So the symptoms of dementia include memory impairment or loss. Some of them include disorientation. Sometimes people experience language problems or planning and organizing. They in the middle of doing something they forget, or in the middle of doing something they can't remember the next step in the sequence. So then they become confused. I don't know if anybody's family member has experienced dementia, but it's really tough on the families who have to deal with the person who's experiencing dementia, because, like my grandma went through this, and my grandmother stopped recognizing us, had no idea who we were, and the person still looks the same, but the person's memory is just gone, or has a bunch of holes in it. So it's really difficult on the family because you see your grandma and you love your grandma, and your grandma looks like the same person, and you can't understand. I mean, I was 7, I want to say, or 8 when this happened. So as an 8-year-old, it was hard for me to understand why she couldn't remember me. Because she remembered me all the way up until this point. You know. And the other disease that we should talk about is Alzheimer's disease, which is a kind of dementia. And it's usually seen in those over 65. And the symptoms, there's a number of symptoms that are similar to dementia, but it usually starts with difficulty remembering something in the recent past. And it progresses over time, so you get memory deterioration, you get people who are totally disoriented and don't know, like they end up in a place and the person has no idea how he or she got there. And it can be really confusing for the person, obviously, and really scary for that person too. So the person's terrified and doesn't recognize the family member who's there to help them. So it can be really disorienting to the person. Eventually, it will lead to the loss of bodily functioning, including breathing, which then leads to death. So you can see on the bottom right-hand corner here, this is a normal person's brain scan versus somebody with Alzheimer's disease. This is their brain scan. So you can see, parts of their brain are just shutting off and not working. That includes memory, and eventually that'll include, making your body function on a day-to-day basis. So, your memory is organized into, a couple of areas, right? So there's like implicit memory and explicit memory. So explicit memory here is facts and events. These are stored in your medial temporal lobe, if you wanted to know. But explicit memory is easily recalled sorts of things, right? So like if you memorized something, it's going in the explicit, declarative kind of memory. If you've really memorized something. And then the other type of long-term memory is called non-declarative or implicit memory. And so in this form of memory, you get all sorts of other types of things other than just facts and events. Right? There's procedural memory. All the skills and habits that you have, including, remember when we talked last week about physical memory or muscle memory? This is what they're talking about, and this is where it's stored, right, in this direction. There's also, emotional sorts of things that you remember. Along with any event, right, comes the emotions of being a participant in that event, or an actor in that event, and so those are there too. And then you have your reflexes, of course, right? That's in the non-implicit parts of your long-term memory. And so then, to end, I wanted to talk about how you make your memory better. These can help stave off things like Alzheimer's and dementia even. So, if you practice these in your 50s and 60s, you will remember things longer. And you won't be as susceptible to those diseases. So one thing you should do is connect information, right? And you want to connect it to your senses, you want to connect it to visual cues, you want to connect it to things that have come before. So cueing is really helpful. That's why people do flashcards. Or, your sense of smell, for instance, is really powerful. It's one of your best memories, actually, is your sense of smell. You can believe that. And so if you can connect something to a sense, either visual or tactile or auditory, then it'll help you remember it. Repetition, of course, everybody knows this, right? Seeing and hearing things quite often allows you to remember them. So, generally speaking, 20 times is about what you're going for if you want to remember something. Store it in your long-term memory and then remember it. You need it repeated 20 times. And then there's all kinds of mnemonic devices that you can use, and usually they combine cues and repetition. So any kind of rhyme that you use, or any kind of way that you help to remember things. So think of like how you remember the months of the year, right? My mom, when I was a kid, taught me 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31, except for February, which has 28, right? So there's a little bit of rhyming in there. There's a rhythm to the words. I repeated it over and over and over again, so now I know which months have 30 days, which months have 31 days, right? ABC song, right? This is how we all learned ABCs. And that combined rhythm and auditory clues and repetition, right? We just did A, B, C, D, E, F, G for years, right? And I can still do it. I taught it to my kids. My kids did it, right? And I'm sure they'll teach their kids, right, when they're older. So those things can really help you remember. And of course, teaching is easily, but far and away, the best way to remember something. And the reason why is because it takes the cues, it takes the repetition, and it makes all those creative connections, and it all does it together in order for you to be able to teach it. You have to understand the material, you have to have conceptualized it yourself and understand how each part of the whatever we're talking about works, and then in order to teach it to somebody else, you have to know it really well. So teaching the info is by far the best way to do something. So if you're trying to study for a test, a great way to study for a test is to sit down with somebody who doesn't know what you're talking about and explain to them the material. So if you're studying for a memory test, right, and you're looking at our PowerPoint here, then what you're going to do is you're just going to start at the beginning, right? What you're going to say is you're going to go to your friend, you're going to go to your little brother, and you're going to say, did you know that anxiety gets in the way of encoding? It increases interference, right? And then your little brother's going to be like, well, what's anxiety? And you say, well, it's like it causes thoughts in your head to just race and race and race. And you get really nervous, and your palms sweat, and you're always thinking about what the other person's thinking and about what you're going to say next and all these things, and you end up freezing up, or you have a panic attack, or you black out completely, right? And so if you teach that to somebody else, it's going to add all those dimensions together, right? All the repetition, all the, if you teach somebody a mnemonic device, right, you'll remember it too. Oops, went too far. And if you can, and so the best way to study for things is to teach someone else. That's why when my son, he's 8, right? So when he comes home and he wants to do something that from school, right? Then I always make him teach me about the particular topic that we're learning about, right? And through him teaching me, even though I might already know it, through him teaching me, he's going to remember it better. My daughter loves to come home and talk about songs that she's learned in school. She's in kindergarten, but she loves to talk about all the songs she learned. So she sings me the songs, and she makes me try and learn them with her and sing them with her. And while she's teaching me, she's learning the songs better. Okay, so that is memory part 2. During the class time this week, during our webinar, we're going to talk about a little bit about diseases like dementia, and we're going to focus on this question: are eyewitness reports reliable? Based off of our ideas of memory and what happens with our memory. Okay, so you guys have a great week, and I will see you in class and around. Remember, don't forget, by the 25th, you guys need to have done your goals in the counseling page. So if you haven't clicked on the little goal assignment yet, you need to get in there and do it. And when you have questions, as always, make sure you tell me, right? Either text me, call me, email me, see me in class. All right? All right, guys. Take care, everybody.